She came in uniform, a Navy officer visiting her old neighborhood. But before she could even knock on the door, two men in fake community police vests stepped in front of her car. Their voices dripped with arrogance, demanding papers, threatening her with zip ties as neighbors silently recorded. In minutes, a decorated servicewoman who had defended her country was treated like an intruder in her own hometown. What the crowd didn't expect was how fast the tables would turn, because humiliating a Navy officer in public is one mistake that can shatter an entire HOA's empire. She came in uniform, a Navy officer returning to the quiet neighborhood where she'd spent her childhood summers. Denise had served overseas, faced storms at sea, and commanded sailors under pressure that would break most people. But today, she was just here for a short visit, to see her mother's old house, check on a neighbor who had once babysat her, and maybe sit on the same porch where she dreamed of wearing that uniform one day. The streets looked familiar but colder now. Perfect lawns lined up like soldiers, trimmed bushes shaped too precisely, and cameras perched on every corner. It wasn't the friendly block she remembered, it felt like someone was watching, waiting for her to step out of line. As she parked, she noticed them. Two men standing stiff near the sidewalk, wearing black tactical vests with bold letters, Community Police. Their posture screamed authority, but their eyes gave them away, too eager, too aggressive, too hungry for control. Denise narrowed her gaze. She had seen men like this before, not real protectors, but pretenders who thrived on power. She stepped out of the car, boots clicking against the pavement, her uniform pressed sharp. To anyone else, her presence should have commanded respect. But Ethan, the taller of the two, walked forward with a smirk that reeked of arrogance. "ID and papers," he demanded, blocking her path. Denise frowned. "Excuse me?" "This is private property," Ethan replied, his tone dripping with false authority. "We don't allow outsiders here without approval." Ryan, the other man, circled behind her like a wolf, his hand brushing against the zip ties strapped to his vest. "Rules are rules, ma'am. You'll need to comply." Denise's jaw tightened. She had stood on the decks of warships in the middle of hostile waters, listening to real threats, but this, two men playing dress-up in her hometown, was almost insulting. "This uniform," she said evenly, her voice steady as steel, "is all the ID I'll ever need. And I suggest you step aside." But instead of backing down, Ethan leaned closer. "Not here, it's not. Around here, we decide who belongs." From the corners of the street, neighbors began to gather. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open, and cell phones were lifted into the air. No one spoke. No one intervened. They just watched, as though waiting for a show. Denise straightened her shoulders. The battle lines were drawn, not in a war zone, but on a suburban street where fake authority dared to challenge the real thing. And she knew, in that moment, this visit home was about to become a fight, not just for her dignity, but for the truth. The silence on the street grew heavier with every second. Denise could hear the faint hum of a lawnmower shutting off in the distance, the creak of a porch swing where an elderly neighbor froze mid-rock, and the faint beeps of phone cameras starting to record. The stage was set, and she was in the center. Ethan puffed out his chest, clearly enjoying the attention. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he sneered. "Just hand over your ID, and maybe we won't have to take you in." Denise tilted her head, studying him. "Take me in? To where? Your clubhouse?" Her tone was calm, but every word sliced through his fake authority. Ryan stepped closer from behind, his boots scraping against the asphalt. He pulled a zip tie free and stretched it between his hands until it snapped tight with a sharp crack. The sound was deliberate, a threat. "We can do this the easy way," he growled, "or we can make an example out of you." Neighbors gasped softly, but no one dared move. Phones stayed up. Some faces wore shock, others wore curiosity, like this was free entertainment. Denise turned slightly, her eyes locking with Ryan's. "Do you really believe this makes you law enforcement? A vest and plastic cuffs don't give you power. They expose how desperate you are for it." Her calmness infuriated him. "Watch your mouth," Ryan hissed, stepping closer until he was almost shoulder to shoulder with her. But Denise didn't flinch. She'd stared down armed men on foreign soil, negotiated with commanders under fire. Two imposters in the suburbs weren't going to break her. Ethan's voice boomed, louder this time, for the crowd as much as for her. "You're trespassing in a private community. You don't belong here. These people don't want you here." He gestured at the neighbors, trying to rally them. But the crowd stayed silent, shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to support or to resist. Denise took a step forward, her shadow falling across Ethan's chest. "This is my neighborhood. My home. I grew up here. And you," she pointed at his vest, "you're nothing but a pretender hiding behind nylon and lies." The smirk slipped from Ethan's face, replaced with a flicker of rage. He shoved a finger toward her car. "Last chance. Turn around. Leave. Or we'll drag you out of here in cuffs." Denise exhaled slowly, her composure unshaken. Her training told her something critical. Bullies like these didn't stop when you gave in, they stopped only when someone stronger stood in their way. And she knew she was stronger. The tension was no longer just between them. The entire neighborhood was now holding its breath, waiting to see who would make the next move. The air cracked with tension as Ethan's smirk returned, sharper now, backed by the false courage of an audience. He barked at Ryan, "Do it." Ryan didn't hesitate. With one swift motion, he grabbed Denise's wrist and twisted it behind her back. The zip tie slid over her skin with a harsh scrape before tightening around her wrist. The sharp plastic bite stung, but Denise didn't flinch. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Phones zoomed closer. Some whispered, horrified, while others recorded silently, unwilling to do more than capture the spectacle. Ethan stepped closer, his voice raised so everyone could hear. "See? Outsiders think they can just stroll into our community. But here, we enforce the rules. Here, we decide who belongs." His words weren't for Denise, they were for the neighbors. A performance. A desperate attempt to cement himself as a man of authority. Denise's face remained calm, but her heart pounded, not from fear, but from anger. She had endured deployments, faced storms that swallowed entire ships, and led men into dangerous waters. Yet here she was, bound like a criminal, paraded in front of people who once knew her family. Ryan shoved her against her own car hood, the metal cold against her uniform. "She doesn't look so tough now," he muttered, loud enough for the crowd. A woman from across the street whispered, "Isn't she Navy?" Another neighbor hushed her quickly, pulling her back from the porch. Fear spread through the block, not just of Ethan and Ryan, but of what standing up might cost them. Denise lifted her head, her eyes scanning the silent faces. She spoke, not to her captors, but to the people watching. "Is this who you are now? Standing by while two imposters humiliate someone in uniform? While they strip dignity in the name of rules that don't exist?" Her voice carried like a command at sea, sharp and steady, cutting through the suburban quiet. Some neighbors lowered their phones, guilt flickering across their faces. Ethan pressed his hand into her shoulder, forcing her down harder. "Shut up," he hissed, rattled by how her words carried more weight than his threats. But Denise refused to be silent. Even zip-tied, even pinned, she radiated defiance. "I've faced enemies who actually had power. You too? You're nothing but cowards hiding behind fake badges." For a moment, even Ryan faltered, his grip loosening slightly. The illusion of control was cracking, and the audience could feel it. But Ethan doubled down, raising his voice to mask his fear. "She's under arrest. This outsider doesn't belong." And with that declaration, the neighborhood silence deepened, the stage set for the moment that would decide everything. The plastic cuffs bit into Denise's wrists, but her voice stayed steady, echoing across the hushed street. Ethan puffed up his chest, drinking in the silence as though it was approval. Ryan shoved harder, pressing her against the hood of her car. The performance was in full swing, until the sudden flash of red and blue shattered it. Sirens wailed. Real deputies rolled into the cul-de-sac, their cruisers cutting sharp beams across the crowd. Tires screeched to a stop. Doors flew open. The entire atmosphere shifted like a storm breaking. Ethan froze for a split second before raising his chin, pretending calm. He waved a hand casually toward the arriving officers. "It's fine, we've got her under control." The deputies exchanged glances. Their eyes swept over the scene, two men in flimsy tactical vests, a Navy officer zip-tied and pinned against her own car, and a cluster of silent neighbors filming every second. One deputy stepped forward, hand on his holster. "What exactly is going on here?" Ethan tried to sound official. "Trespassing. She's resisting community enforcement. HOA rules are clear, outsiders don't belong." The deputy's brow furrowed. "Community enforcement? Show me your credentials." Ryan stiffened. Ethan stammered, fumbling for words. We're authorized by the association. We have the right to detain." Denise lifted her head, eyes blazing, her voice cutting through the charade. "Deputy. My name is Lieutenant Denise Carter, United States Navy. These men have unlawfully detained me." The weight of her words fell like a hammer. Neighbors gasped. The deputy's posture changed instantly, alert, professional. One moved forward and sliced through the zip tie binding her wrists. Denise straightened, rolling her shoulders, her uniform catching the flashing lights like armor. Ethan sputtered, desperate to salvage control. "She's lying. She doesn't belong here." But the deputies weren't listening anymore. They rounded on Ethan and Ryan, demanding IDs. Neither produced a badge. Neither had authority. Their vests, their bravado, it all crumbled in the face of the real law. "Hands where we can see them," the deputy barked. For the first time that day, Ethan's smirk disappeared completely. Ryan's hands shook as he raised them, his earlier arrogance collapsing into fear. Phones in the crowd captured everything, the imposters exposed, the Navy officer standing tall, the truth unraveling in real time. And Denise, her wrists free, didn't need to shout anymore. Her silence alone carried more power than their loudest threats. The balance of power had shifted. And the entire neighborhood knew it. The street was no longer silent, it buzzed with nervous energy. Flashing lights bathed the neat lawns and manicured hedges in red and blue. Ethan and Ryan stood frozen, their earlier bravado slipping with every second the deputies advanced. "IDs. Now," the deputy repeated, voice firm, no patience left. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. His earlier confidence, the barking orders, the smirks, the staged authority, evaporated. Ryan fumbled with his vest, pulling out nothing more than a laminated HOA card. It looked pathetic under the cruiser's beam. "That's not law enforcement identification," the deputy snapped. "You've got about 3 seconds to explain why you had this woman zip-tied." Denise stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Because they're frauds. They claim authority they don't have. And they did it in front of their entire community." Phones tilted, catching her words, catching Ethan's face as his composure collapsed. "She's lying," Ethan finally shouted, desperation breaking through. "We were protecting the neighborhood." But the crowd no longer believed him. Whispers rippled through the neighbors. "They really tied her up. She's Navy, she's telling the truth, they're in trouble now." The deputy didn't wait. "Turn around. Hands behind your backs." The clink of metal handcuffs replaced the plastic snap of zip ties. This time, Ethan and Ryan were the ones restrained, marched toward the back of a cruiser under the same flashing lights they tried to mimic. The performance was over. As they were loaded in, Denise stood tall, rubbing her wrists where the plastic had bitten deep. Her gaze swept the crowd, neighbors who had filmed, whispered, but stayed silent when she needed them most. Many lowered their eyes, ashamed. One deputy approached her. "Ma'am, we'll need a statement. But for the record, thank you for your service." She gave a small nod, the words steady. "Just doing what I've always done, standing against cowards who abuse power. The neighborhood, once complicit in silence, had just witnessed a reckoning. The imposters were gone, their empire of intimidation shattered in a single night. And Denise had proven that even in the quietest suburbs, truth still had the power to win. By the next morning, the quiet suburban street had become national news. The videos spread like wildfire, shared on social media, replayed on local stations, dissected on national talk shows. Headlines flashed across screens. Fake HOA police arrest Navy officer. Servicewoman humiliated in her own neighborhood. Community complicit in silence. Clips showed Denise zip-tied against her car, Ethan barking orders, Ryan shoving her down, and then the reversal, the real deputies cutting her free while the imposters were marched away in cuffs. The contrast was undeniable. Neighbors who had once whispered now found their names attached to viral videos. Comment sections burned with outrage. Why didn't anyone step in? This woman served her country, and they treated her like an outsider. The HOA enabled this circus. HOA leadership scrambled, issuing vague statements about rogue volunteers and misunderstood intentions. But the damage was done. Investigators uncovered that Ethan and Ryan weren't acting alone. The HOA had quietly encouraged them to enforce community rules, hoping their intimidation would keep certain families from moving in. Federal charges soon followed: impersonating law enforcement, unlawful detention, civil rights violations. Ethan and Ryan's mugshots circulated everywhere, their arrogant smirks replaced with pale, hollow stares. Through it all, Denise remained steady. She gave her statement to authorities, but refused interviews, letting the videos speak for itself. To the public, she became a symbol, not just of military service, but of dignity under fire. In online forums, veterans rallied behind her. Civil rights groups pointed to her case as proof of systemic abuse hiding in plain sight. Politicians promised investigations. And in that once quiet neighborhood, things changed. The porches where people had hidden behind cameras now carried different conversations. Some admitted shame, others regret, and a few finally spoke out against the HOA's culture of fear. For Denise, it wasn't about headlines or going viral. It was about a simple truth: power built on lies will always collapse when exposed. The HOA had tried to humiliate her, to erase her presence. Instead, they destroyed their own authority, and in doing so, turned a Navy officer's visit home into a story the entire country would remember. Weeks later, the street looked the same: perfect lawns, trimmed bushes, quiet evenings. But nothing truly felt the same. The HOA office stood empty, its windows dark, eviction notices piled against the door. The illusion of control had collapsed. Denise returned once more, not in uniform this time, but as herself. Neighbors glanced her way with mixed emotions, some with guilt, others with gratitude. She didn't need their words, the truth was already carved into memory. Standing on the porch of her childhood home, Denise whispered to herself, "Power isn't about fear. It's about responsibility." Her story had become more than a neighborhood scandal. It was a reminder that silence enables abuse, and courage exposes it. The HOA thought they could strip her dignity. Instead, they revealed their own corruption. And Denise walked away, not as a victim, but as the woman who turned their empire of lies to dust.